Hey folks, how we doing here? It's Mr. Carter, ready to do HomeLink 6.5. Go ahead and put your name on this if you haven't yet already, and let's begin. Alright, so we got a problem here that we need to solve. It's assigning people to buses, and let's go ahead and read that. So we got Mr. Atkins is organizing the 4th and 5th grade field trip to the Science Museum. He asked his students to help him figure out which students and teachers should go on each bus. The number of students in each class is shown in the table below. So we got Mr. Atkins, fourth grade class here. He's got 31 students. Miss Smith has 28. Mr. Bates has 29 students. Miss Gonzalez has 27. So here's some important information. So there are 4 buses that have been ordered. The maximum number of passengers is 30 per bus. And passengers is going to be important here in a second, and I'm going to talk about that. Each bus must have 1 teacher. So let's go back to that word passengers. So we need the maximum number of people or passengers is 30 per bus. But what our table is giving us here is the number of students. So we need to add the teacher to each of these numbers. So instead of passengers, instead of students, we're going to say passengers. So Mr. Atkins would need place for 32 passengers. Miss Smith would need room for 29 passengers. Mr. Bates would need room for 30 passengers. And Mrs. Gonzalez would need room for 28. I'm going to put it down here because there's no room in the chart. So now that we've figured that out, let's go ahead and look at the problem. So Carrie said he solved the problem this way. 115 divided by 4 is 28 with a remainder of 3. So what does his numbers mean? Well, we have 115 is the total number of passengers. Okay, so 115 is the total number of passengers divided by 4, which is the number of buses. Okay, so now what is 28 with a remainder of 3? Well, that means that there are 28 passengers can fit on each bus with a remainder of 3. That's how many people are left over. So with 3 people left over. Okay, so that's what his numbers mean in that number sentence. So question 2, which students and teachers should go on each bus and explain why? Well, if we go back and look, there are 2 buses that we don't need to do anything with. So we're going to go with the bus that's exactly 30 passengers to begin with, and that's Mr. Bates' bus. So including himself and all his students, he's got exactly 30. So we don't need to split up his class at all, and he can ride with his students. So I'm going to say that here. So Mr. Bates can go on his own bus with all his students. Because that is exactly 30 passengers. Okay, so he's all set. So now we're going to look at the next bus that doesn't need to be split up, or the class that doesn't need to be split up, and that would be Mrs. Smith. And why am I going to Mrs. Smith instead of Mrs. Gonzalez? Well, because Mrs. Gonzalez has the fewest amount of students. And she's going to have to help Mr. Atkins up here. Okay, because we're going to need to shuffle. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But Mr. Atkins has too many passengers for his class and him. He's got 32. And Miss Gonzalez has the least. So Mrs. Gonzalez is going to help him out. But let's go back to Mrs. Smith. So we're not going to touch Miss Smith. She's got exactly 29 passengers. So she doesn't need to be split up with her class. So we're going to go Miss Smith can also go with her own class because that would be 29 passengers. Okay. So now who's left? We have Mr. Atkins and Miss Gonzalez. So again, Mr. Atkins is going to need some help. He has 32 passengers. So he's going to have to take 2 of his students and help send them on with Mrs. Gonzalez. So because if we do that, if we take 2 students from Mr. Atkins' class, he'll be left with 30 passengers. And if we take those 2 and give them to Miss Gonzalez, she will also have exactly 30 passengers, which means she would have a full bus, he would have a full bus, and those 2 kids from Mr. Atkins' class won't get split up any other way. So that's what's going to do. That's what we're going to say. So we're going to say Mr. Atkins will send 2 of his students on to Mrs. Gonzalez's bus. That will give both of them exactly 30 passengers. So that's how we're going to work this out. Alright, so let's go down to the bottom where it's practice. And we're going to be adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators. So I'm going to do number 3 and 5 with you. I'm going to do an addition and then a subtraction problem. So again, it's 3/8 plus 4/8. And when our denominators are the same, like that, let me zoom in a little bit better so you can see. So it's 3/8 plus 4/8. Again, when the denominators are the same, all you got to do is add your numerators. So 3 plus 4 is 7. And our denominator stays the same, so it's going to be 7/8. Go ahead and work on 4 by yourself. And let's do 5. So again, we've got 4/5, take away 2/5. Our denominators are the same, so we just got to subtract our numerators. So 4 take away 2 is 2, and the denominator stays the same, so it's 2/5 there. All right, and go ahead and work on 6 by yourself. And if you do have questions, please come and see me, and hope this was helpful.